have been written in the scriptures, people have been thinking the return of the Christ is imminent. And think of the people back then, 2,000 years ago. A lot of them thought it was going to happen within their generation. And now it's 2,000 years later, we associate it with our time period. But suppose somebody makes a prophecy kind of a little bit nebulous, not being specific, and the prophecy is really about something that's going to happen in the year 4000, which is 2,000 years from now. We would think, wow, why are we even making a prediction that far away? That's so far away. So this is why back and at that time that people associated it with their generation. Each generation expects it to happen in their lifetime. Almost everybody you talk to that believes in the second coming thinks that they will live to actually see it, especially if they're younger. Maybe if they're really old, they may not, but the younger people, uh, almost all of them that believe in the occurrence will actually think it's going to happen in their lifetime. So for 2,000 years, almost all the believers have thought it would happen in their lifetime, and they've died without it actually happening the way it's portrayed in the scriptures. And by reading the scriptures, the way they expect it to happen is there's going to be a big apocalypse, a lot of destruction, a great antichrist showing up. And after a period of great conflict and desolation, people will look up in the sky, no matter what part of the earth they're in, and see uh, Christ showing up with multitude of angels, and everybody on earth will see it at the same time. No one's figured out how they're going to see it on both sides of the earth at the same time, since like if he showed up in America, people over in Russia wouldn't be able to see it because that's on the other side of the earth. So maybe it'll be some miraculous way that they're going to, Jesus is going to telecast his uh, uh, coming to the whole planet. And then maybe you'll be out mowing your lawn, and if you're a believer and your neighbor is mowing his lawn and he's a non-believer, he's going to be zapped and turned into embers, and you're going to be saved and taken up to
Raptured.
meet the Lord in the clouds and so on.
Be raptured
so,
up.
so anyway, people got all kinds of weird beliefs, and the problem is when people read the scriptures and take them black and white literally, they all almost are always wrong. Just like everybody was wrong with the first coming of Christ, except for a very small handful. How did people expect the Christ to come the first time? They expected him to
Like a
come to,
king. He was going to come
yeah,
as a
what'd you
king.
say, Curtis?
He's going to come as a king and establish a rule over the earth.
Right. And he would come as a conquering hero, right? Right. And he would throw down the Romans and destroy the Roman Empire and set the Jews up to be the rulers of the world. And the Messiah would bark out orders and tell everybody what to do and set everything straight. Okay. And that's what they were expecting for the Messiah. And so they were waiting and waiting and waiting, and it never happened. And then what did happen? A small babe was born in a manger, and he was raised out of sight of almost all the eyes that were looking for the coming of the Messiah. And when he did come, he came in a way that very few expected. The scriptures does talk about an old lady, I think her name was Anna, that she was praying to God that she would be able to lay her eyes on the Messiah before she died. And she was an elderly lady, and it did talk about her that she she was able to see the Messiah before she died, and she died happy. But she was one of the few that was expecting him to actually be born as a regular mortal person. And but most people were expecting something really supernatural to come down. Now, are we any different this time? The Christian churches are expecting Jesus to show up in just a big blaze of glory, like lightning and fire and brimstone and all kinds of fire come down out of heaven, destroy all the wicked. And because of this mindset, the apostles were with Jesus in a town that rejected him, and a couple of the apostles said to Jesus, "Well, let's be like Elijah. Elijah called fire down from heaven. Why don't, with all your power, Jesus, why don't you call fire down from heaven and consume this city that rejected us?" And does anybody remember what Jesus said to him?
I read that the other day, and I was actually thinking of it just before you mentioned it.
You
Really?
know not what manner of men ye are.
Right. You know not not matter of men you are, right? You don't understand how off the track you guys are. He says the Son of Man came not to destroy, but to save. So he straightened them out there. Yet we make the same mistake now. A lot of the believers are just sitting around waiting. They think, well, it doesn't matter if things are getting worse all the time. We don't need to do anything about it because we want them to get worse, because when they get so bad, then Jesus is going to come down and zap all these bad guys and make everything right. And what do you think he'd say to these same people again? Think he'd say the same thing?
Pretty
You know
much.
not what manner of thinking you have here. The Son of Man came not to destroy, but to save. Just hearing that, don't you feel good? Knowing that that is the way that our Lord thinks. He doesn't want to come destroy everything. If everything gets destroyed, it's completely us that does it. It's not him. He doesn't want to come destroy everything. He wants to save everything that can be saved. And eventually, all of us will go back to our source, but each of us at different times. So the coming of Christ is geared not to be a black and white fulfillment, but it will be fulfilled to work into what is the best good for humanity. In other words, that which will benefit humanity the most will be what the masters will work toward to in their manifestation. Now, we're not only going to have the second coming of Christ, but we're going to have the materialization of the hierarchy as a whole. And this will happen in a number of different ways. Uh, some of the hierarchy will actually incarnate and work among us, and others will work among us in the spirit and inspire disciples and overshadow them. And as far as the coming of Christ will happen in 3 stages. Stage 1 is the recognition of the Christ consciousness. What is the Christ consciousness? Somebody volunteer a definition of it for me.
Well, it's the higher aspect of love that you find within yourself, love, compassion. When you connect with the light of your soul and it illuminates you inside, that would be my definition of
Is it
Christ
just available for a
consciousness.
few people or everybody?
Well, everybody can connect
Right.
with it that wants to, that rises to that level of consciousness.
Right. Within the core of our being is the Christ consciousness, the same consciousness and life essence that was in Jesus or the Christ himself. So this, it says right in the scriptures that Jesus was a firstborn of a great family of brothers. Okay, so he was the first to achieve what he achieved, but he was far from the last. We will all achieve what he achieved because all of us have within the core of our being the Christ God consciousness that can be accessed. And one of the main things that he tried to emphasize to the people was that this is available to everybody, not just him. He didn't try to point out of him being any person that was an exception, but he tried to point out that what he could do, we could do. And when he healed people, never once did he said, "You're healed because of what I did." He never said that at all. When he healed people, what did he tell them? You're healed because of what?
Your faith has made thee whole.
Right, because of your faith. He said, you're not healed because of what I did. You're healed because of something that happened within yourself. It was your faith. Your faith healed you. So he never took credit for anything. And when he went around doing his great works, he made this statement that is the ultimate of humility. He said, of myself, I can do nothing. He says, it is the Father within me that does the works. Now, sometimes I try to think that to myself and I think, boy, that takes tremendous humility to say, of myself, I can do nothing. Think of that thought to yourself. Of myself, I can do nothing. It takes tremendous humility to even be able to say that to yourself, because we all like to think of ourselves as being powerful and everything. But he didn't think of himself as being powerful. He said, of myself, I can do nothing, because he realized that his lower self was nothing compared to the power of God that was available. And when he makes that link with God, then he can do everything. Then, like he said, nothing is impossible. If you have faith, he says, you can point at a mountain and say, be removed and cast into the sea. And he says, it shall be done. So that's far removed from being able to do nothing, to be able to move a mountain and cast it into the sea. So
Wasn't he speaking largely of the miracles that he was performing? That he wasn't really, it wasn't him performing the miracles, and even the words that he spoke. He said, "These are not my words, but they're given to me of the Father."
right, and
So
we're going to talk about that. That's a good point. So the first part of the coming of Christ is to have the teaching prevail among humanity that the Christ is more than one individual, but there's a consciousness of Christ. There's a point of Christ within each one of us. And this is something that has to permeate the consciousness of humanity before he comes again. This is stage one in the second coming of the Christ, is the understanding that Christ is within each one of us. Christ was just not within Jesus, but Christ is in each one of us, and we can access that higher consciousness. This has to happen before he comes again, because the last time he came, very few people were able to recognize him, because that to recognize a person that is an example of the Christ on the outside, the disciple has to be able to tune into the Christ on the inside. And very few were able to recognize him last time. A lot of people followed him because he did the miracles. But outside the miracles, like when after he was arrested, everybody deserted him because they didn't have that contact with the Christ on the inside. They were only following the miracles on the outside. But this time it has to be different. This time, a group of people, a significant number of people have to be able to be in tune with the Christ on the inside. So when a master appears on the outside, we can sense that vibration and think that even if he gets arrested, even if the government doesn't like him and arrests him and throws him in jail, we will think, even though he's in jail, even though all the media says he's a crazy man, there will be the people that have a connection of the Christ on the inside that will say, this is the Christ, or this is an example of the Christ. This is a master. This is a messenger of God. And it doesn't matter what the media says. It doesn't matter what Hollywood says. It doesn't matter what anyone says to those who have a connection with the Christ within. So the first stage of the coming of Christ has to be a certain percentage of the population has to be in tune with the idea that there is a Christ within. Now, the basic concept of the Christ consciousness has permeated humanity quite a bit. So the term Christ consciousness has been in circulation quite a bit, but not everyone really understands what that really means. But just it being there and a lot of people repeating it has a beneficial effect. And then a handful really understand what it is and tune into it, tune into the inner Christ to the point that when truth is presented on the outside, they will recognize it from the inside. And this permeation, first permeation has to happen before Christ can come again. So that's the first stage in his coming, is the permeation of the idea of the Christ consciousness with a certain number of people understanding what that really means. Okay, the three steps in the consciousness or coming of Christ. Anyone know what the second step is?
Isn't that the overshadowing of a group of disciples?
Right. The second step is overshadowing. Now, there's interesting scripture in Zechariah, I think it is, that talks about 7 principal men that will be overshadowed by the Christ. And so there's, my guess is there's there's 7 different individuals throughout the entire planet that will be overshadowed for different purposes. And so then when a person is overshadowed, then he can gather together around him a group, and then that group has potential to create a group overshadowing. Now, what people don't understand about the first coming is the first coming was an overshadowing, was actually more dense than overshadowing. It was more like I call a divine possession. Now, there's stages of overshadowing where a master such as the Christ or Dwal Kul or Master Moria or Kut Humir, these masters have the ability to tune in to disciples that are working in the world, and they can overshadow them to the point to where they will feel, the disciple will feel a presence, and they'll feel a presence and they'll pick up information and the thoughts and ideas that the master will want them to carry out. But then there's a more intense thing that will happen, which will be what we call a divine possession. And this is what happened with Jesus. And it happened with Jesus at his baptism. That is, just before his baptism, John the Baptist was wondering, he was given a revelation that he was to prepare the way for the Messiah. He was looking around and didn't see any Messiah showing up yet. So he asked God, well, how will I recognize this Messiah when he shows up? And John was given a revelation that he says, you'll recognize him because when the Spirit descends upon him and then remains, you will know that this is the Son of God. And that's what he was told. So John went out and he baptized people. And when he baptized people, they felt a nice presence, a nice spirit descending on people that were baptized. And then it kind of come and went. And then he baptized his cousin Jesus, and something different happened. Then he felt a presence descending from on high like a dove. And it says it went in Jesus and it remained. And then John the Baptist knew that his cousin Jesus, was the one that was appointed to be the one that contained the Son of God. And he was the Son of God in the fact that he was a very highly evolved entity, not that he was the only one, because all of us together constitute the one Son of God, because we're all one. Each of us has to recognize that oneness. But the one that came into Jesus was one that was fully awake. And he was the same one that is in the scriptures identified as Melchizedek. And he came, his spirit actually came into the body of Jesus. So at that time, there was Jesus and Melchizedek in the same body at the same time. And I'm not sure if Jesus was expecting this to happen the way that it did. And the reason he was so somewhat perplexed by it, that he went in the wilderness afterwards, right after the baptism. And I believe the reason he went in the wilderness is because he felt that presence with him and he wanted to understand it. And so he needed to be alone. And he went out in the wilderness for 40 days. And to be able to commune and understand what was going on and what he was supposed to do. And during those 40 days, his mind and the mind of Melchizedek became as one mind. And then he came forward and he did these marvelous works. And when he did these marvelous works, the people came to him and said, "Boy, Jesus, you're really wonderful, all the stuff you can do." And he says, "It's not me that does these works. It is the one that is within me. He does the works." Okay. So in other words, Jesus had within him somebody much more advanced than himself. And then he organized his 12 apostles and also 12 females and created a molecule. And the, 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 the link, this molecular link that was established between heaven and earth through Melchizedek, was able to transfer or share this power with the apostles. So they went out and they did mighty works as well as Jesus. And then we all know the story of the crucifixion and the betrayal of Judas. And after the betrayal, the molecule was shattered, so it had no power, and all the apostles thought the whole thing was over until the resurrection. And then they added the 12th missing unit that was missing because of Judas. And then we had the day of Pentecost where the molecule was reinstalled with even greater power than before. So this overshadowing on various degrees, we have an overshadowing where the consciousness of Christ and various masters are projected to certain disciples. They keep track of disciples within their auras, and they communicate with them and send them impressions. And so setting up disciples that they overshadow to various degrees, this is an important part. And then the divine possession um, is the next stage. But the big question is, will the Christ come in a body of his own? And DK seems to indicate that that is the plan, that he will eventually come in a body of his own. When you read him carefully, you see that that even the masters aren't in on the complete plan about the second coming. Because for one thing, it's dependent a lot on the consciousness of humanity and what is best for us. So what's best for us may not be, it may not turn out to be the Christ coming in a body of his own. It may be just overshadowing like it was last time. Last time it was a divine possession. It may be that this time in the creation of molecules, and by the creation of molecules, the hierarchy can extend their consciousness. So that may be all that they need to bring people into the new age. On the other hand, there's a lot of indications that there will be a greater externalization. But it doesn't have to happen. It doesn't have to happen that Christ will come in a body of his own, but near the end of the communications with Alice A. Bailey, he was kind of siding on that idea that he probably most likely would. But a lot has happened since then, and humanity hasn't progressed as much as the hierarchy has hoped. In a lot of ways, we have a conflict now that didn't really have to materialize the way that it did. We, in some ways, we could have been a lot farther down the road of progress toward goodwill and peace on earth. But we're at a we're at a point of crisis right now that we have to solve. This is one of the reasons we've come up with uh, the Declaration of Goodwill, so that we hope to nudge humanity in a positive direction. Because one of the problems with the churches is they think things have to get a lot worse before Christ will come again. Well, it's actually the opposite. Things need to get better before he comes again, because it wouldn't do him much good to come again as in a human body looking like you and me if there was nobody to appreciate what he had to say. I mean, look at the internet now. You can put out really great things on the internet, and you got, and in books, there's all kinds of teachers teaching all kinds of things. And no matter what you put out there, there's somebody else putting out something that is like it, but distorted and has a lot of misinformation and a lot of error in it. And the average seeker out there can't tell the difference. The average seeker can't tell the difference between something that has a lot of error in it and something that touches on the spirit. But we need more people that are able to discern truth from error. Just like if you surf around the alternative spiritual sites, you'll find that if somebody picks up a certain guy that claims to channel some master, and that's all he's read, well, he's going to believe it hook, line, and sinker, and he won't believe anything else. And so the errors that are in that he will accept. And so all kinds of people have different things that they glom onto. And then there's other people that maybe have read 3 or 4 different teachers or books or philosophies, and they believe them all, even though they disagree with each other. And but they don't have the discernment to say, well, A disagrees with B, so which one is right? So they don't even ask that question. They just think, well, I like them both. Both of them sound good, so I accept them both. And so there needs to be a certain number of people that are in touch with the Spirit so that they can recognize the Christ when he comes. Now, DK tells us something interesting about the Christ. He says that when he worked through Jesus, there was Jesus and the Christ, and the Christ, Jesus passed the 4th initiation at that time, and the Christ passed the 6th initiation and the beginning of the 7th. And he is still working on the 7th, and he will finish the 7th with his second coming, or his reappearance, as it's called. Okay, so he says, he makes this interesting statement that I never thought of before, but he basically says to put yourself in the position of the Christ, and you're supposed to make a return, and people have all kinds of ideas as to how glorious that will be. Well, how are you going to pull this off? And so he kind of presents this idea that look at the pressure that's on the Christ to be able to pull off a second coming successfully and make it effective. And so suppose you are him, and you had to make a second coming just as an ordinary human, but with extraordinary wisdom. Uh, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to pull this off and make an effective uh, uh, presentation so people will believe you and follow you, and you can make a big difference in the world? And the trouble is, there's about dozens of people out there already that claim to be the Christ. I get regular emails from a number of people right now that claim to be the Christ and want me to follow them and be the John the Baptist for them. but these poor people are deluded, and some of them don't even have one follower, you know, and a handful have a small number of followers. There's one guy in Soviet Union or Russia has a community. At least he's got a few followers, but there's all kinds of people already claiming to be the second coming. But then there's all kinds of people claim to be in contact with the masters and have the ultimate teaching. And so when Christ comes, he's got to compete against all these guys. So let's suppose that he shows up and just starts posting something on Facebook. I mean, how's he going to stand out? What's he going to do to draw people around him? So that's an interesting thing to think about. So there's three stages in the coming of Christ. We have the first stage, which is the Christ consciousness. The second stage, which is the overshadowing, and then possibly a divine possession. Now, the divine possession may be as far as the Christ may have to go to be effective. And that may be in the creation of the molecule and the Christ and the hierarchy working through ordinary humans like you and me in group formation. But if the circumstances are right, then he will come in a body of his own. Now, if he comes in a body of his own, that can happen in several different ways. Number one, he could just be born as a regular baby again, just like he was last time, or just like Jesus was, and grow up. The second way he could do it would be as a walk-in. He could exchange places with a disciple, and let's say Natalie here, all of a sudden, maybe Christ comes to her and he says, can I change places with you? I've got a really nice celestial abode you can go to, and it's really a great place. If I could have your body for the rest of your life, your body's life. And so he could change places with her and make his appearance through her or any of us, you know, if we had a high vibration. That would be a second possibility. The third possibility is to create what is called in esoteric writings a Maya Varupa. And this is the high master has a power through the power of his mind to actually create a physical body and then appear in it. So a master such as a Christ can actually materialize a physical body and appear in it just as you or me, but would be a much lighter vibration than one of our bodies, but it would be a body that could interplay with other people. So if that happened, that would be interesting. Yeah, it would be kind of fun to see how this could play out, like if he just all of a sudden showed up in the middle of a United Nations meeting or something like that. I doubt if that would happen because it would be somewhat of infringement on free will. In other words, the masters don't really work in such a way to give you stark proof that can't be denied, so to speak. It's just like the first time. Jesus just didn't show up in a blaze of glory in a way that the Jewish authorities had to accept. He showed up as an ordinary individual, and he did some extraordinary things, but not enough to convince the Jewish authorities that he was the Son of God. They thought he was just a magician in league with the devil. And so they dismissed him completely. And so it's interesting that however he shows up, it will not be in such a way that it convinces us against our will, in such a way that it has to be in such a way that people that are in tune will be able to recognize him. People that are not in tune with the soul will not be able to see who he really is. And so we look forward to that time. And this is one of the commitments of the true disciple, is to do everything possible to prepare the way for the coming of Christ. Because to prepare the way, people need to be enlightened. There needs to be a greater sense of peace on earth, a greater sense of security, a greater sense of goodwill among humanity. And that's why the angels sang that song, Peace on Earth, Goodwill to Men, because for the reappearance of the Christ, a certain amount of peace and goodwill must be present among humanity for him to be able to manifest and accomplish his work. If we're all at each other's throats and worthy of destruction, well, he won't be able to accomplish very much. But he will be able to accomplish much more if people are looking for greater light and truth. Okay, any comments or questions on this subject?
I think the Christ could start off by getting his own channel on YouTube.
Yeah, it's interesting to speculate what he would do if he does show up in a physical body of his own. And he'd, well, let's hope the first thing he does is join the Keys group.
I have two comments based on what you've said so far. And the first one of my favorite scriptures, I think Paul was talking, he said, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God."
Yeah, it's a great scripture.
So we have to assume that consciousness of Christ and assume the same mind that he had. Only then can we create that fertile soil that would blend our consciousness with greater minds. And the other is when in the 12 labors of Hercules, when he goes through the labor of Pisces and he goes through the gathering of this herd of red cattle, and he gathers them all together in this cup, or this chalice, and it brings them together into a homogenized group that is gathered into a greater state of consciousness collectively. And then the Tibetan says that, or I think might have been Foster Bailey, whoever was interpreting the labor, says that there will be a collective conscious group, a high group, that would be receptive to the influences of the Christ, that would be a group, not just one individual, but that group is now forming. And he talked a lot about that in the 12th labor of Hercules, and when Hercules becomes a world savior, which would basically be what we would assume that role.
Yeah, I remember I just didn't feel right about the way the churches taught about Christ when I was younger and I attended church. And then when it occurred to me that Christ was really no different than me, except he had just progressed farther down the path, um, that he wasn't really special in any way that I couldn't be special, that was very enlightening to me. It just really felt right. And when I read in the Aquarian Gospel where he says, what I can do, all men can do, and what I am, all men shall be. And that really felt good to me. And there was a missing ingredient in the churches, is that teaching where the churches think that he was a special son of God in a way that none of us could ever be. And that's just not true. He's a brother that is merely an elder brother. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Yes, JJ, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay. If he chooses to materialize in a new body that he will create, he will be limited because he will have no documents, so he will not be able to travel as a regular man or woman.
yeah, it's interesting. DK mentions this, that our boundaries would be a limitation to the Christ, but you would think if he materializes in a Maya Varupa, he could dematerialize and materialize somewhere else. So he doesn't really clear that up as to if passports and everything would be a limitation to the Christ. It just depends on how dense into the material world I think he goes. If he goes dense enough, then he would perhaps be as limited as we are. But who knows? He's the teachings of in the Bailey books don't really make that clear. Okay. Any other comments or questions?
JJ, does it say anything specifically in the Bailey works about the work of the Buddha during the reappearance of the Christ and what he might be doing specifically?
Yeah, the Buddha isn't in a physical body, he's in the spirit. And so he's mainly works in between Shambhala and the hierarchy. So he advises the Christ, but he there's no plans for him to incarnate. But there is tentative plans for Christ to make a reappearance in one way or another. And exactly how that will happen is a great mystery. No one knows but the Christ himself and his Father, which would be the Ancient of Days.